Okay, good afternoon. I'll call the meeting to order. I would like to make the following statement and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. I would like to introduce the panel members for this afternoon. To my far left is Mr. Jeff Peich. To my immediate left is Mr. Harvey Diamond. My name is Cynthia Stevens, and I'll be chairing today's proceedings. Our assessor today is Mr. Cam Wong, and the secretary is Ms. Katie Sutherland. We'll be hearing applications or revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemption from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We'll then have the assessor's testimony, followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. And could you please make sure your cell phones are turned to silent? And Katie, if you could swear them in, please.
Please state your name.
Cam Wong?
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Please state your name. Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, thank you. So the first property on today's docket is 114 McGregor Street, and it appears that the only items of discussion are assessed value, correct?
Actually, I believe the liability and classification are in.
Oh, they are?
At,
Okay, sorry.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, yes, they are there. My apologies, missed that. Okay, so we're doing liability to taxation, amount of assessed value, classification of property. Okay. And just before we get started, we've just been reminded, board members have been reminded once again that we are not to accept as evidence previous board orders. So if you have anything of that nature in your packages, please don't refer to it in the hearings because it's not something that we can take into account. I think if there is anything in there, just skip over it and we will not refer to it at all. So, Mr. Wong, if you wish to proceed on 114 McGregor.
The subject property is 114 McGregor. The roll number is 140-024-08500. It's a residential apartment block that's 8 stories high, built in 1977, and has 121 units with 21 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We used average rents of $508 to get a potential income of $738,000. Use a 2.4% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $720,000, and we used a 59% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $293,000. Capped at 5.6%, we have an estimated market value of $5,244,000, which is $43,000 per unit. On page 4 are our rent comparables, showing that the rents we use are on the lower end of the range of market. There's also some market expense comparables showing that the expenses that we've used are at the lower or at the higher end of the range for market. The expense comparables range from 43 to 53%, and the models applied a 59% expense ratio. On page 5 is information on how we derived our cap rates. Cap rates range from 4 towards 7.3%, with the majority of them falling between 4.9 and 5.3%. On page 6 are some cap rate sales. They're there to substantiate the accuracy of the model. On page 8 is a picture of the subject property with its location. On page 9 is some information on the subject property. You'll notice that the utilities included are heat, hydro, and water. That's the typical affordable housing type properties, and it's not the best representation of what market expenses might be for a typical apartment. On page 10 and 11 is the income statement provided by the owner, which is Manitoba Housing and Renewal Corporation. So these income and expense figures, they wouldn't be representative of market because it is affordable housing. On page 12 are some market rents from CMHC. See that for a newer building such as this, built in 1977, a bachelor might be around $730, and we've applied rents of $508, so definitely on the lower end of the range for market. Regarding the assessed value for this property, we've looked at it as a below average apartment building, and we've applied rents that are at the lower end of the range, and we've applied expenses that are at the higher end of the range. The cap rate that we've applied is similar to other properties, so I asked you to maintain the assessed value for this property at $5,244,000.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Reimer, any questions?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. What I propose, with your permission, is I'll ask Mr. Wong the questions I have relating to common issues that involve the common issue of cap rate. And if I could ask that to be carried forward to the remainder of the hearing, so that we don't need to keep reviewing that. And what I would then propose to do, I'll ask Mr. Kemeny any other questions I might have on the structure of the issues relating to liability evaluation, and then once the board's asked their questions, I'll just present my entire argument, including liability and such.
Yeah, sure, okay. That sounds good.
Perfect. So thanks. Mr. Wong, we can agree that the property is owned by MHRC, Manitoba Housing and Renewal, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, do you guys want me to, I guess, go through the classification information that I have before?
Maybe that would be good, actually, or
Well, the onus is on us.
for that, yeah, okay, so yes, that's
up
correct.
to you.
Let's the way you said it,
Yeah, I thought you were going to ask me questions about stuff that I haven't presented already.
So he'll ask you about the assessed value now,
Sure.
Yeah.
and then we'll ask you, and then when Mr. Reimer presents, he'll present his assessed value argument, and then you can ask him questions on it.
Yeah.
Liability and classification, okay.
So as to the issue of valuation, the assessed value then, if we can turn Mr. Wong to page 3. And you've alluded to this. This is a model-driven valuation right from top line through to bottom line, including the cap rate?
I believe it is, yes.
Okay. And the cap rate of 5.6%. Now, if I could ask the board members, Mr. Wong, turn to page 5. So this is the summary chart that the department's provided to you to present in general terms as to how the model what kind of rates the model kicked out, and then on your page 6 though, the comparisons, you've got a total of 5 sort of in the middle of the page, starting with Wilk Street and ending with Ward, and then there's also one in the bottom, 500 Portage Avenue. So at the top of this page it says these aren't meant to be comparable specific to the subject. Is that the position that you're taking though, that these comparisons are not meant to be specific to the subject or the properties on this docket?
They're meant to substantiate the accuracy of the cap rates that the model has utilized.
Okay, okay,
But these are actual sales, so you can look at them as actual sales as well.
okay. Now the department hasn't provided you with the detailed information, and you haven't submitted any evidence as to how the net operating incomes for these 5 properties in the middle are calculated, correct?
Correct.
And with respect to the 500 Portage Avenue at the bottom, you've put in there NOI and in the brackets Altus. So am I to gather from that that this is an NOI that you obtained from an Altus brief?
Yes.
Okay. Which brief was that?
I believe it was,
If you're not sure, Mr. Long, that's fine.
I'm not 100% sure, but it would have been close to the, it would have been at the time of the sale.
Okay, fair enough. Now, were you aware that this property was purchased by the current owner, it's Timber Creek, with the view to complete substantial renovations to the property?
I know that they are doing some renovations, yes.
Are you aware of the extent of the renovations?
No.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. Madam Chair, as to the valuation issue, those are my questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Pike, do you have any questions?
I have
the assessor. Mr. Diamond?
Yeah, Mr. Wong, how do you model, assess or determine a 5.6% cap rate on this property?
I would be based off of the age and location of the building.
Okay, so the age is obviously newer,
Yeah.
so if it wasn't for the location, what would the cap rate have been?
I'm not totally sure. It would probably be between 4.9 and 5.3.
And so the difference is because of location,
I believe it
because
is.
it's got a 5.6 cap, so you're saying that's 0.6 or 0.7, that's attributable to the location of the property.
I don't know what the adjustment is for that period, but this property does fall into the market region, which has a higher cap rate than the rest of the city.
Okay, you're just not sure how much higher.
I am not sure how much.
Okay, thank you, that's my question.
My question was around the cap as well. So this is model driven, and so because it's an MHRC property, there's been no overriding or anything to that effect.
No,
with the cap?
we treat these properties
It's
as
the
the
same,
market.
yeah. Okay. Okay, that's all I had, Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll first delve into the valuation issues, including some suggested rebuttal for that's going to be filed in response to the cap rate evidence, and then I'll talk about the liability classification issue that needs your approval. So if we could turn initially just to page 2, and this gets to the very questions that Madam Chair, you and Mr. Brandon were asking, is the location of the subject. So I'm just going to note that the location, as you can see in our main brief on page 2, it's at the corner of McGregor Street and Flora Avenue and Stella Avenue. So I think as far as the premium goes, that would seem to explain the premium based on the location of the subject. We're of course suggesting a different cap rate again, but it certainly comes into play. So this, by way of framing the discussion from our perspective, this is an MHRC property that is run as an elderly housing unit property. As Mr. Wong, no debate whatsoever that the rental income in place is a geared-to-income rental stream, so it's very much below market as far as the gross revenue being received. And we certainly concede that, don't suggest that the actual revenue being generated is anywhere close to market. So to cut to the heart of the issue on the valuation, if we turn to page 6, towards the bottom of the page, we are not disagreeing in this case with the net operating income of $293,691 that the assessor has calculated in this case. This is of course based on a fee simple valuation using a potential income of $738,000, which is substantially higher than the actual gross revenue, but for those reasons I mentioned, we're not taking that actual gross as being representative of market. We don't disagree with that calculation, and we'll apply an NOI of $293,691 in our valuation as well. The issue in this case, if you turn to page 7, the issue relates to capitalization rate. So in this, for the purposes of valuation for this property, we're suggesting a rate of 7%. Now that 7% is based upon a couple of things in this particular case. The base rate that we've got for, as set forth in our cap rate study is 6%, and I'll talk about the cap rate study very shortly, but we're also adding another premium of 1% to account for the added risk of the nature of the property, the budget housing, which doesn't have landlord and air conditioning, landlord on site and air conditioning, and that's the case with this property. Is there, based on the reported questionnaires, there is no air conditioning in this case. The lower income tenancy and the higher risk associated with high turnover and such, and the very basic finishes and limited parking, which is also the case with the subject. So based upon those additional factors, we're adding 1% to the base premium of 6, and that then results in the suggested value this afternoon of, as you can see at the bottom of page 7, of $4,196,000. That again is using the department's NOI and a 7% capitalization rate. So on the valuation, then before we get into the liability taxation classification, I'll move to the crux of the issue, which is on valuation, which is capitalization. So if I could ask the board members and Mr. Wong to refer to our capitalization rate study. So again, I'm pretty confident that all the board members have heard this many times over, so I propose to go through it at a higher level. In summary, on page 1, there is a chart of our suggested capitalization rates. As you can see on that chart, the cap rate range that we're suggesting for pre-1946 is from 6.25 to 6.6, and actually from 46 to 59, also 6.25. From 60 to 79, 6%. From 80 to 97, 5.75, and for the newer buildings of 1998 and newer, we're suggesting 5.25. So in support of those suggested rates, if we then turn to page 3, and this is the crux of our capitalization rate submission, we've got the chart with the various sales indicated that we've analyzed, and the capitalization rates, which as shown there, range from a low of 5.13% for 333 Ward, which is one of the newer properties on the study, to a high of 6.75% for 512 Balmoral. So based upon this data, and again, all the supporting, as I mentioned previous hearings, all the supporting data is behind this, behind the text of our brief to support the values that we've come up with there. And based upon those, we've come up with the conclusions that we have at the bottom of the page, and as indicated on page 1 for the various ages of the properties. Now, in the case of the subject then, taking the 6%, I'll just draw the board's attention to the return, just confirming that as I mentioned, the 1% addition was based upon a couple of factors that are typical of these kinds of operations, and it includes a very low amount of parking and no air conditioning and such, and that is actually, perhaps it's not in there. Yeah, the forms are actually blank, but I can confirm that that is the case. What I'm looking for, so if you go to page 39, for instance, that is the form that gives the building characteristics and amenities and such. And for these types of operations, and I believe that's the case with the subject, number of parking stalls is typically very, very low, and the lack of air conditioning, as I mentioned, is also a factor, and therefore the higher rate we're suggesting would be applied here, which is 7%. So I had asked Mr. Wong briefly about a couple of things with respect to the cap rate. And to be fair, he was very forthright in his comments about the rates, what the rates were intended to do, which is not to be specific to the subject, but rather to justify the model. We've got some rebuttal evidence. The first set that's being handed out now relates to the 5 properties that are contained in the capitalization rate materials at Mr. Wong's page 6. And maybe there should be one for each file.
Okay.
And then this separate document, the other additional piece of information that's was in Mr. Wong's brief related specifically to 500 Portage Avenue. And if you recall, I'd asked the question of Mr. Wong about the intent to renovate and such, and I've got some materials on that point. In summary, and again, I believe the board members would, and Mr. Wong certainly have seen this repeatedly as far as not the 500 Portage, but the other 5 properties. What we're suggesting is that, now to get to my own copy. Oh, I think I gave you mine.
The small one?
Yeah, thanks. Oh, no, the other one, sorry.
Okay.
Thank you very much. What we're suggesting is that the sales number 1, 2, and 3 that are contained in the chart in Mr. Wong's brief were purchased with intent to renovate. And with respect to Ward, that's also property that's in our own capitalization rate study. We believe that our stabilization at 5.13% is appropriate, and ask that the board continue to make reference to that rate. The purchase with intent to renovate is located in our main rebuttal document at page 9. This is Municipal Board Order 18-431, and at page 9, the board talks about the effect of transactions where there was a significant intention to renovate. And what they said is, with the 4 remaining comparables, sufficient concerns were raised by the appellant on 3 of them regarding the purchaser's intention to significantly renovate or alter the structures. So we're suggesting that with respect to the transactions on Roche and Maxwell and Talbot, that's a factor. And then on the second rebuttal evidence, this is specifically on 500 Portage Avenue. Recall, Madam Chair, that I had asked Mr. Wong about if he was aware of the circumstances related to this transaction, and if you turn to pages 3 and 4, which is the Free Press article talking about the purchase, and specifically those paragraphs that have a little asterisk beside them, the new owners do talk about the fact that there will be substantial renovations. And the last page, page 4, towards the top of the page, the spokesperson says he revealed that all 3 buildings will be renovated inside and out. The exterior work will include the installation of new exterior cladding, new paint, landscaping, and upgrades to all the apartment balconies and the rooftop patio and pool. The interior work will include renovations to the lobby areas and indoor amenity spaces and extensive upgrades to all of the suites. That includes new kitchens, new bathrooms, and new appliances. And the additive will be a full scope renovation. So certainly I would suggest that the property of 500 Portage falls squarely within that category that the municipal board was referring to, with a full intent to significantly renovate. And we would ask that cap rate that was set forth in these transactions be viewed very, very cautiously for those reasons. So, in summary then, for all of those reasons, we're suggesting the 7% capitalization rate be applied in this case, and that results in a suggested capital value, as we set forth at the bottom of page 7, of $4,196,000. Moving then to the liability and classification issues.
I'm just wondering, maybe.
Or do you want to ask?
Yeah, I think
Okay,
it might be
fair
easier
enough.
for us and for Mr. Wong if he asked you questions based on the assessed value, and then we go to your
Yep,
presentation on it. So,
fantastic.
Mr. Wong, do you have any questions?
Regarding
The assessed value, yeah.
maybe should I stopped at that point before, and then went on to the rebuttal.
Well, and the rebuttal evidence as well.
Yeah, yeah. The 1% that you're adding to your 6% cap
Yes.
rate, is that based off of any sales information?
It's not based on any specific transaction that I can point you to. It's just a subjective suggestion based on the amenities of the subject, or lack of amenities of the subject.
That would be all my questions regarding
Okay,
that.
thank you. Mr. Diamond, do you have any questions on what's been presented?
I don't think.
Mr. Budge?
Have you been through the property?
I have not been inside this property.
So you've described limited parking, you've described no air conditioning, anything else that would be detrimental to somebody looking to the city housing?
The lack of air conditioning is a common theme with this house, like with MHRC's own property, so that's why I'm pretty sure it's the case here. And the parking ratio, as opposed to a typical building where it's usually sort of 1-to-1 or somewhere close to that,
Yes.
these are closer to sort of 50%. And therefore, but in fairness, Madam Chair, to Mr. Pudge's question, I haven't been through the subject to confirm it's 100%. And I'd actually thought it was in those pages I referred to, and they're blank in this case, so can't be 100% sure, but I'm pretty confident.
So as far as you know, there are no other factors?
Not other than that, no.
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
So you're not aware of the general repair of the building? I know sometimes with MHRC
Yeah.
properties, that's an issue.
They're constrained because of the revenue they're generating, as my best submission would be they're doing the best they can with what they have.
Okay, thank you. So now we'll proceed with your presentation on the other two issues.
Okay. So if I could ask the board members and Mr. Wong to turn to page 8.
Sorry, I guess maybe getting back to the rebuttal.
Oh, I thought you were going to ask questions on the rebuttal in your...
Sorry.
You're ready to ask questions of the rebuttal as well, but.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I thought we were going to do it kind of the
No,
value
no,
and
sorry,
then- and then
I
do the-
indicated you could ask them at the same time as your other questions,
Yeah,
but if you
sorry.
have some, then go ahead, sure, especially if this is going to be used for the rest of the hearing.
Yeah. I guess I'd just like to point out a few things on, not necessarily ask questions, but point out a few things on, in the rebuttal, and on page 9 of the rebuttal. There's the second paragraph, which is underlined. It says, like, halfway through that underlined section, it says, I think the applicant is trying to say that the renovation sales shouldn't be included, does not disqualify, or disqualifies a sale from possible cap rate analysis, but in the middle of that paragraph where it's asterisk, the board does not accept that any intention to renovate should disqualify a property sale. So I just wanted to point that out as part of the decision. And on page 11, the property sold for $3,610,000, and on the bottom of page 11 says the suite upgrades are $100,000. So, and yeah, and also on page 12, that on this number 32 says, was the purchase price based off of the property's net operating income? It goes yes, and the capitalization rate was 5%, and that's actually very close to what we've estimated the cap rate at, which is 4.84%. So I just wanted to point those things out.
That's it?
That would be our
Okay.
And Madam Chair, just to respond.
Yes.
If it truly was $100,000 and that's all that was spent on a $3.6 million investment, I'm not going to dispute what Mr. Wong's saying, that doesn't seem like substantial renovations. That's in stark contrast to 500 Portage, where they're talking about spending millions of dollars on these substantial things, okay? But if that's truly all it was, then that's something I would not take great issue with. The other transactions certainly appear to indicate that there were some more significant, for instance, on page 17, that amount was $413,000 such. So there certainly is a line that has to be drawn, and $100,000 on a $3.8 million. That I would not disagree that doesn't seem like significant or substantial renovations.
Okay, thank you. Based on what we just heard, any questions?
I have
No? Okay, I don't either, so you can proceed. Thank you.
If I can proceed on liability.
Yes.
Okay, so then if I could ask the board members and Mr. Wong to turn to, in our brief, to our page 8. So what we have here, the starting point, is under section 23 of the Municipal Assessment Act, where it says real property is exempt where it's used by a non-profit organization. I'm skipping through this. Elderly housing unit or hostel is defined in the Elderly and Infirm Persons Housing Act. So that's the starting point for the exemption. The Elderly and Infirm Persons Housing Act then goes on to state that elderly person means a single person of 65 or more years of age and whose annual income doesn't exceed an amount equal to 5 times the annual rental for the accommodation that he occupies, and the next definition is relating to a spouse, where a spouse is also added to the equation. And the elderly person's housing unit means housing accommodation that has separate kitchen and bathroom facilities for 1 or 2 elderly persons. So here, what we're suggesting is that this is actually a property that is being run as an elderly person's housing project, and it would therefore qualify for the exemption under Section 23 of the Municipal Assessment Act. The property, and I'll go through the attachments here, the property is listed in the sponsor-managed social housing projects in the City of Winnipeg. It's owned by MHRC, and MHRC has confirmed that it is MHRC is actually the body that issues the licenses pertaining to the elderly person's housing projects under this act, under the act referred to on page 9. And since it's the body responsible for the administration of that act and the body responsible for issuing the licenses, MHRC has confirmed it does not issue licenses to itself. So that if you were to do a search, you wouldn't actually find a license by the operator who's operating it on behalf of MHRC, but that's because MHRC has made a deliberate decision not to issue licenses to itself, and that's included in our materials. So what we're suggesting, and of course going on to page 10, that the administration, MHRC owns the property, and the program and the administration of the property and the programming is conducted by Knights of St. Josephat Inc., who are a nonprofit organization. So what we're suggesting this afternoon is that based on these factors, the taxable status should be changed to school tax exempt, and that the classification should be changed to Code 40, which is institutional school tax exempt. So if I could ask then the board members and Mr. Wong to turn to page 18 of our material. So page 18, this is the email advice that we received from MHRC, and at the middle of that page, what the MHRC representative is saying is that unfortunately the EPH's elderly person housing units or built properties do not have any licenses because the whole buildings are owned by MHRC, who's also the issuer of the EPH licenses. The applications have been submitted by the sponsoring organizations, but licenses have not been issued as it does not feel right, in quotations, to have MHRC issue itself a license. So that's what I alluded to earlier, where they've made a policy decision not to issue licenses to themselves because they have, of course, intimate knowledge of both the property and the operator who's administering the program and the property. Then on page 20, this is a printout, one page of the printout of the sponsor managed. At the top of that page, you'll see sponsor managed social housing, elderly persons, 55 plus housing in the city, and roughly halfway down you'll see the subject 114 McGregor Street as appearing on that list. Then going to page 22, there's just a summary of, actually from the Aging Opportunity page, that talks about the subject property, talks about the monthly rent, which of course is subsidized based on gross income, and other social activities and such relating to the building. And then, and this is where it gets a little interesting, I could ask Madam Chair, the board members, and Mr. Wong turn to page 24. I'm going to be very upfront with this. So the legislation under the Elderly Persons Housing Act, if you recall, the definition in that act says an elderly person is defined as someone who's 65 plus. However, on page 24, you'll see this is the actual application for the license to operate an EPH facility. And the definition of elderly person and infirm person, there in the middle of that application, they're defining elderly person as an unmarried person of 55 or more years of age whose annual income, including assistant, does not exceed an amount equal to 5 times the annual rental for the accommodation. So this is the exact wording lifted out of the EPH Act, except the age, instead of being 65, is now defined as 55. So notwithstanding that discrepancy, clearly the intent of the, as shown in the application, and the intent of the building itself is to define an elderly person as 55 plus, and we're suggesting that notwithstanding that difference, that the exemptions should still apply, but I'm wanted to be very upfront about that there is this discrepancy, and we've asked MHRC about it. And they certainly have maintained that despite what the legislation says, they are in fact treating EPH housing as, qualifying for EPH housing as 55 and not 65. Then on pages 26 through 29, there's the excerpts out, or sorry, 28, the excerpts out of the Municipal Assessment Act relating to the exemption. I had also referred to in my brief. And then the pages out of, on pages 29 through to 30, 31 is the pages out of the Elderly and Infirm Persons Housing Act. And then on pages 32 through 34, it's the regulation relating to classification of property, which confirms that confirms the institutional classification for those properties that qualify for an exemption under Section 23. So for all of those reasons, we are suggesting that this would and should qualify as an elderly person's housing unit as defined in the Elderly and Infirm Persons Housing Act, notwithstanding that discrepancy as to age, and we're asking for the exemption and classification to be applied. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wong, questions?
Is this property owned by Manitoba Housing and Renewal Corporation?
Yes, it is, in fact. Yeah.
That's all my questions.
Madam Chair, just for reference, page 21, which confirms the ownership on the assessment notice. I don't believe there's any dispute as to ownership.
Mr. Pike?
What are the criteria to qualify for housing?
For the subject building or
Subject.
as, okay, so for the subject, that's, if you turn to page 24, please.
So highlighted section that you would.
Exactly, so in order for a person to qualify to move in here, they have to be 55 or older, and then they have to have the income, meet the income qualifications that are set forth there as parts of maximum income and such goes.
In your view, does this then meet the description in the Elderly and Infirm Persons Act?
It meets the intent and not the letter, because the act says 65.
No other questions? Thanks.
Oh, Mr. Dunn.
Okay, so technically, there's no reason that MHRC can't issue a license to itself to
Well,
qualify.
technically, absolutely, there's no reason why.
And I think the city would have to then give them school tax relief, because they have to be a licensee that.
Well, there's two issues. They haven't issued themselves a license, which we're suggesting isn't fatal, but then there's also this discrepancy between their form, which is 55, and
Right.
the act, which says 65.
Right.
So there's actually two things at play here that need to be reconciled, I'll put it that way.
And would you think that a forum for hearing this is better in the courts than our board?
I believe it will need to be settled in that forum.
I think it's going to be going there.
So I'm making this submission, I'm making the submission,
Yeah.
but it wouldn't surprise me if that's where it was settled, yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, because if you look on page 8, it says used by a nonprofit organization, charitable organization, or municipality, which MHRC is none of.
Well,
But I know
actually-
it's being managed by,
St. Joseph's, on that point, what's the name of it, St. Joseph's, the administrator of the property, and so, I'm gonna take a half step back. If MHRC didn't own this property, and I'm just gonna call it St. Joseph's, so if St. Joseph's approached MHRC and said, for this building, assuming it's, you know, and they said, we own this building, we want to now have it qualified as an EPH facility, they would have been given a license. The reason they weren't is
because they.
because MHRC owns it, but St. Joseph's is the nonprofit that is using the property. So I don't believe that, I believe actually that fits better than some of the other criteria, because they are using it
Yeah, it
as.
says used by, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it would seem that there's a couple of things there that MHRC needs to clean up for this to be a cleaner decision, I think, yeah.
I will rest it as I've said it.
Okay. Okay, that's all that I had on this then as well, so thank you. Any need for summation on this property?
I guess I'd just like to go through some of the information that I had in my brief regarding the classification.
Oh, yes, sorry. My apologies. Because we're doing it the other way around, and I forgot.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, go ahead.
That's on page 13. This property is owned by the Manitoba Housing and Renewal Corporation. Manitoba Housing is a Crown corporation. On page 15 is what I feel is a more appropriate section for Manitoba Housing Properties, which is section 21 of the Municipal Assessment Act. I feel it fits under section 21 and not section 23. In section 21, says that properties that are exempt from taxation that's owned by the Crown, in which case, in this case, it is Manitoba Housing. And properties that are owned by the Crown, they are exempt from taxation. So in this particular case, they are exempt, but they pay a grant in lieu of taxes, and so on page 16 is an excerpt from the Municipal Act saying that that grants are paid in lieu of taxes for Crown corporations. So I guess in our view, it is owned by Manitoba Housing. It is a Crown corporation. They are exempt from taxation. They do pay a grant in lieu of taxes, and in this particular case, their classification of 20 grantable is consistent with other Manitoba Housing properties. So that's where we stand with regards to classification and liability for this property.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Armour, any questions?
No questions, just a quick reply. I mean, sure. So, everything that Mr. Wong's presented, I don't dispute any of it as far as the characterization, the potential characterization of the subject, but this is the loop you're in. We've seen this not with respect to MHRC, but with other Crown corporations. On page 16, and I may be very brief, for the reasons we discussed, I think this could be settled at a different format for something the board to think about. Page 16, the very bottom, section 335 sub 1 of the Municipal Act, talks about grants being paid that would be payable with respect to the lands if they were not exempt from municipal taxation. And so this is the loop you get into. You start off by saying Crown properties are entirely exempt, and then you go to this section that says you're going to pay grants, but only grants based on what the amount would be if you weren't exempt. And this is our very point. If MHRC, I just alluded to this, if MHRC wasn't the owner, St. Joseph would have been issued the license and they would be school tax exempt. So I don't believe any of this actually would sway my opinion as to the qualification of the subject as a school tax exempt property for the reasons we've discussed, but it just gets there through a more circuitous route. I think the bigger potential questions relate to what we talked about, what's the gap between what the legislation says versus the application, 55 versus 65, and the other question that's come up regarding issuing licenses to itself, effectively, or to the person who's occupying its premises. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Dunn, any questions?
No,
on this?
please, thank you.
No, I don't either, thank you. Okay, now, anybody have any requirement to summarize this property?
I certainly don't need it.
No? Mr. Wong?
Well, I guess I can quickly, I'll provide a summation with regards to, like, this is not a market level apartment building, and we try to value it as if it were a lower level to account for some of the deficiencies that Mr. Reimer has mentioned, and so we feel that the value is reflective of a average of an apartment building that's at the lower end of the range of average, and I ask that you confirm the assessment.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll move to the second item on the docket today, which is 191 Cathedral Avenue. And it looks like we are dealing with the amount of assessed value, correct? And Mr. Wong, when you're ready, please.
Subject property is 191 Cathedral Avenue. The roll number is 141-001-235-80. It's a residential apartment block that's 3 stories high. It was built in 1927, but we have an effective year built of 1959. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We use average rents of $857 to get a potential income of $329,000. Use a 3% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $319,000. And it's a 45% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $175,000. Capped at 5.3% with an estimated market value of $3,315,000. It's $103,000 per unit. On page 4 are our rent comparables, and the rent reviews are in line with what's in the market. On page 5 and 6 is the information on how we derived our cap rates and some cap rate sales. On page 9 is a picture of the subject property with its location. On page 10 is their most recent mailer prior to the reference date. And if you can go to page 10, their 2017 net operating income is about $195,000, which is about $20,000 higher than what the mall was estimated at $175,000. Their actual performance supports the model, especially in their 2017 mailer. So I ask that you maintain the assessed value at $3,315,000.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Verma, any questions?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Mr. Wong, on page 3 then, again, this is a valuation, if I understand correctly, that was model driven from top to bottom.
I believe so, yes.
Thanks, Madam Chair, that's my questions. And if I could ask the cap rate questions again.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Pike, any questions? Mr. Dunn?
I don't have.
I do not either, so Mr. Ryan, you can proceed.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Page 8, please, of our submission. So actually, in this case, as you'll see at line 33 of our valuation, we are actually applying a net operating income that's nearly $195,000, $194,398. It is significantly higher than the department's model-driven NOI, but we believe this fairly reflects the performance of the property. The difference in this case is actually cap rate again. If you recall from our capitalization study, for properties in the bracket between 1946 and 1959, we're suggesting a capitalization at 6.25%, and assuming that the department's variant age is correct at 1959, recall that it was built significantly earlier in the century, but I am for the moment assuming that 1959 is not inappropriate, and that would be in that 6.25% category. And then that results in a value, suggested value this afternoon of $3,110,000. And for those reasons, and the reasons I provided on the cap rate, we're requesting accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wong?
No questions.
Mr. Diamond, do you have any questions of Mr. Reiner?
I don't think it.
Mr. Pike?
No, I don't, thanks.
And I don't think I do either, so thank you. Any need for summation? So the next property property on today's docket is 330 Anderson Avenue. And we're dealing with amount of assessed value. And Mr. Wong, when you're ready, please.
The subject property is 330 Anderson. The roll number is 140-422-35000. It's a residential apartment block that's 2 stories high. It's built in 1957, and it has 30 suites with 18 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We use average rents of $654 to get a potential income of $235,000. Use a 2.4% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $229,000. Use a 54% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $104,000. At the 6% for an estimated market value of $1,745,000, so $58,000 per unit. On page 4 are rent comparables, showing that the rents being used are in line with what's in the market. Page 5 is a summary of the income and expenses submitted by the owner. Their estimated operating income is about $113,000, which is a little bit higher than what the model is estimated at $104,000. Page 6 and 7 is information on how we derive our cap rates based on cap rate sales. Page 9 is a picture of the subject property with its location. The remainder of the brief, there are some the income and expenses submitted by the owner.
Anything else?
No, the actual performance is supportive of the model, so as they maintain the assessed value of $1,745,000.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Reimer?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Mr. Wong, page 3, please. So again, this is the model-driven value from top to bottom, including cap rate, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Then turning briefly to your page 5. So the way and looking through the income and expense questionnaires, what was actually reported, to be clear, by the owner was, as shown on the form, was a loss of $102,000 in 2017, a net operating income of $41,747 in 16, and an NOI of $102,000 in 2015, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you weren't suggesting that somehow the $113,629 NOI was what was reported, because in fact the performance of the property was significantly different.
No, it was used, the $113,000 was used, estimated using their 2017 income and their expenses from 2015.
15, right.
Because their expenses from 17 and 16 are including capital, and so their 2015 seems like a normal year of expenses, and using the 2015 expenses, their estimated operating income was $113,000.
Okay, but you didn't attempt to stabilize anything from 16. You talked about capital, but are you suggesting that 100% of the expenses in 2016 and 17 above $114,000, so it was reported 15, all of that relates strictly to capital?
No, I'm just saying it'd be difficult to pick it out.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks, Madam Chair. Those are my questions.
You're welcome. Mr. Pudge, any questions?
Have you inspected this either inside or outside?
I have not.
Questions, thank you.
Mr. Diamond?
I don't have any questions, thank you.
So are you aware of what has this been renovated? You aware what capital went in there at all?
some, in 2017, there was some roofing. And in 2016, there was some windows and doors that were in the neighborhood of $48,000 and $47,000 respectively.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of your cap rate, my previous property was effective age of 1959 and was at 5 point whatever it was, and now this is at 6. Is the cutoff in there somewhere? Do you know? Because this is at 57. I'm just wondering, because these buildings look to be a similar age. Yeah, 5.3, and then this is all the way at 6, and there's only a 2-year age difference. I'm just wondering if you know what the model cutoff is there?
They should have the same cap rate. In this particular case, I don't think they do. It's possible. I don't know where the border is for that,
Okay,
for
you're not
that,
aware?
for that
Okay.
market region.
Yeah.
It might be right on the edge of that border, and if it is within that one market region, that's.
So it could be the
Yeah.
market region issue
Yeah.
as well? Okay.
Yeah, but the.
You're not sure where
basically-
that border is?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly where that border is, but if the building has the same attributes and is the same location, it will have the same cap rate.
So you're suggesting that it's more likely the location rather than the age?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Reimer, please proceed.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So if I could ask board members, Mr. Long, to turn to our page 8, please. So there is, in this case, a slight difference if you look at line 33. Our suggested stabilized net operating income is $96,302, so it's not substantially different, but it's somewhat different than the model-driven NOI of $104,685, so we're lower by about $8,000. I'd asked Mr. Wong about the stabilization, or the assumption about capital items. If you'll note in our line 27, repairs and maintenance, what we've stabilized it at is $45,238. Which I believe this is 30 suites. So what that equals, I'll just get the precise figure here, that equals a rate of $1,508 per suite, which for a 1957 building is, I'd suggest, appropriate. There are certainly no qualms on our part. Mr. Wong had referred to a roof repair of $42,169 in 2017. That we've taken out as well, and so we certainly believe that at the end of the day, the actual reported NOI, as we've calculated it, once you take out the capital items for 2017 would be $54,596. That's too low. In 2016 it was higher at $110,000, and in 2015 it's $103,000. We're stabilizing at $96, so we do believe that's a fair representation, including a fair stabilization of the repairs and maintenance amounts. That's based upon that 5-year average. The 2017, again, having taken out the capital roof repair of $42,000. So based upon that, NOI of $96,302, and then for the same reasons we previously discussed on cap rate, this is a 1957 build and we're suggesting 6 1/4, resulting in a suggested value of $1,541,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wong?
No questions.
Okay. Mr. Pike, do you have any questions?
Thank you.
Mr. Dunn?
So when you think of stabilized expense ratio, you're basically taking over a number of years and averaging it out.
Averaging it out, but adjusting of some items, like for instance, what was reported in 2017 as repairs and maintenance, it's actually far higher, but it included the roof repairs and
I understand, but
Yeah, so it's an average, or if it's to be clear, Madam Chair, if it's an expense like wages typically that are going in one direction, we won't use the average, but we'll use the 2017, for instance.
well, fair enough, but when you do stabilize, you're basically adjusting the figures to to arrive at.
What we'd expect, yeah.
Well, not only that, but it can be manipulated to get very different final answers.
Well, it manipulated, I'd suggest what we're trying to do is come up with a most reasonable interpretation.
And that's
that
fair,
has a
and that's
number.
fair, and I know that the owner, even being fair, will look at things from their point of view, but has that to say that the model might not be more accurate?
Because the model, I'd suggest, for the same reasons that we're coming in at 8,000 lower,
Yeah.
that's why we provide this detail. I don't know any details that have gone into the model. There's obviously been a lot going into it.
Yes.
But as far as what factors the model used in terms of age and condition and location and such to arrive at its values, site-specific is always preferred over the model, I'd suggest, because it gives a much more clear site-specific indication of what the property's doing. Now, within that, of course, we're making adjustments.
I mean, you stabilize you are.
But this, as opposed to the model, which is a computer, you know, it's a camera model, a mass appraisal model based on all the inputs, and then based on these characteristics, kicking out what, you know, what it believes would result from the property. This is actually what's happening, and I'd suggest to the board, this should be preferred in every case for that reason. In some cases, like here, we come up with an NOI that's lower. In other cases, like the previous one, we actually come in with an NOI that's higher,
Right.
always thinking that it's,
Wow.
yeah, the site specific.
Well, the NOI, that one was reported higher on the information from the applicant.
Precisely,
Yeah,
precisely.
and this one it wasn't.
Yeah.
So you basically couldn't stabilize that because it already was higher.
Well, but we used a higher amount, right? That's what I mean.
Of course,
Yeah,
I know this stuff.
yeah.
But that was the amount that was actually reported by the owner.
Yeah, and in this case, it's much lower, but we stabilized it upwards, like the 54,000, as I say, we're not suggesting that, that's too bold.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So are you aware of any of the actual suites themselves been renovated at all? Are you aware?
The suites, based on, for instance, sorry, not here, if you go to our page, our page 17. So we've taken two things out, and they're very significant. The roof repairs, which doesn't get to the suites themselves, but it would be a capital item. If you turn to the next page, the very top item, and this is what Mr. Long had also referred to, window door repair of $98,734. That's a huge expense. We've taken that out as well. So neither of those two items, those would be considered capital, no doubt, and we've taken those out from our repairs and maintenance. So it doesn't look like in those, this isn't getting to the suites, but certainly gets to the capital items, and they need to be taken out of the equation, because they're not expensive, they're expecting to incur every year.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Any requirement for summation of anything? No? Okay, so before, we're gonna just take a quick, really quick recess before we do the next property, please. Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order. And one of our panel members has recused himself just from this particular property, so we'll proceed with Mr. Diamond and myself on 820 McGregor Avenue. Mr. Wong, when you're ready, please.
Okay, the subject property is 820 McGregor. The roll number is 110-205-41000. It's a residential apartment block that's 2 stories high. It's built in 1958 and has 15 suites with 12 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We use average rents of $768 to get a potential income of $138,000. We used a 3% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $134,000. We use a 49% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $68,000. Kept at 5.1%, we have an estimated market value of $1,334,000, which is about $89,000 per unit. On page 4 are rent comparables, and the rents we used are in line with what's in the market. On page 5 is a summary of the income and expenses submitted by the owner. Their estimated operating income is about $73,000, which is a little bit higher than what the model is estimated at $68,000. Page 6 and 7 is information on how we derived our cap rates. On page 9 is a picture of the subject property with its location. The remainder of my brief are the income and expense mailers submitted by the owner. income is supportive of the model, and I asked they maintain the assessed value at $1,335,000.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Werner, questions?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Mr. Wong, on page 3, that's the model-driven and valuation top to bottom, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And then turning to page 5. Now, actually, just briefly, Tom, if I could ask the board members to turn to your page 10, please. So we can agree that what was reported on the 2017 operating statement was a total suite income of $121,658, correct?
Yes.
And on the next page, the potential that they show based on 100% occupancy is $132,805?
Yes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Diamond?
So I'm just wondering how the model picked a 5.1% cap rate on a 1959 property.
It's based off of the Asian location.
So 1959 would qualify for a 5.1?
Yes.
When does it change?
1946.
And then what comes 5.3?
Well, the thing is, within between 1946 and 1975 or so, within the size of the building affects the cap rate as well. So if it's a smaller building, then the cap rates tend to be lower.
Okay, so it's just a smaller building, maybe it's sitting on
Yeah.
larger buildings.
Yeah.
Because I've moved it to 5 at 5.3, and it seems like anything that
Yeah.
is this would have at least a 5.3.
Yeah. This building is smaller than some of the other buildings that we've had so far.
Okay, thank you.
My question was related to the cap as well, so, and the reasoning behind that is smaller buildings, bigger
It's
markets?
difficult for me to say what the reason is, because those are the property purchasers, but based off of the sales information that we have, this is kind of what it points to. Like we have the sales information, we have their income expenses, and we have the sale price, but we don't have what they were thinking when they were
Buying it,
making
no.
their purchase.
Yes, got it, understood, yeah. Okay. Mr. Reimer?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just on that point of size, and on our capitalization rate study, you'll note that a number of our buildings are the smaller-ish buildings, 15 suites or less, and would suggest that isn't perhaps as pronounced a factor as the department's mass appraisal model would seem to predict. While we would certainly agree that when you've got a smaller building, there are more potential investors at the lower price point, but at the same time, for instance, if you've got 10 suites and you have one suite vacant, well, now you've got a 10% vacancy. So I'd suggest it's something that cuts both ways, where the risk increases in some respects. Possibly there's more participants in the market for it, but based on our capitalization rate analysis we've done, we'd suggest that the size as one of the factors is perhaps a little overstated by the model. In any event, on page 8, please, of our submission. Now, in this case, it's a curious case because if you look at our line 13, the effective gross income has actually declined quite considerably between 2015 and 2017. It went from $149,670 in 2015 down to $122,968 in 2017. That's a function both of top line potential income going down, which seems to indicate that there was some difficulty in the suite rentals being maintained at that level, but also, as you see there for 16 and 17, some significant vacancy and bad debt issues. 2017, for instance, between vacancy in and of itself and the bad debts, that was upwards of $10,000 that the property lost that year. What we've suggested in our valuation on line 13 for the effective gross income is $130,131. So it's actually, at the end of the day, not far off from what the model's predicting, but still about $4,000 less. On the expense side, the total expenses, as you can see there, we've applied a total expense of $76,574, which is 58.8% expense ratio to arrive at an NOI of $53,557. Pardon me, that those expenses include a stabilized repair and maintenance expense, as you can see on line 27, of $24,066. And that, just to be clear where that number came from, that was based upon the four-year average between 2013 and 2016, but not including the higher amount in 2017, which we believe would properly include some capital. So we've left that one out of the equation and applied just the four-year average between 2013 and 2016. That then results in an NOI at line 33 of $53,557. For the reasons we discussed, the subject falls within the age bracket of 1946 to 59, so we're suggesting 6.25%, which results in a suggested value of $857,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wong?
Do you know why their income dropped from 148,000 in 2015 to 121,000 in 2017?
It appears that there's two factors. They're simply not generating the rent that they were.
No, I'm just saying, like, do you know why?
Do you know why it dropped?
Yeah.
So, do I know why? No. Do I assume? I assume it's driven by the market demand, but do I know that with absolute certainty? No. So that's fair.
That's all my questions.
Okay, Mr. Dunn?
I have no questions.
So you're not aware whether they had some, they were doing some renovations, so they had some vacancies, or?
Well, and that's why I'm saying I think it's market demand, because actually there are some clues. When you look at our line 27, the repairs and maintenance expense, it's not substantial enough in those figures, with the exception of 2017, to that would indicate a full-scale rehab where they'd have the income drop that much. So I don't believe it was due to that. And on the vacancy side, there were some problems in 2017 and 16, but not of, we're not talking about going from 148,000 to 130,000 in itself. There was another drop of about 18,000 in there. That's what I'm attributing to market demand.
Is, to your knowledge, is there in this type of property in this neighborhood, is there a problem with the vacancy?
Based on the subject's performance, I'd say there is a problem with the vacancy, but what it doesn't explain is why that additional 18,000, where that's coming from. The vacancy and collection loss is very clear, but the gap between 148,000 in 15, like top line, line 3, and 132,000, that's what I'm attributing to market.
Okay.
I don't know why. That seems to buck the trend of at least, remaining stable if nothing else.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Any need for summation on this property?
Thank you.
No, thank you. Okay, we'll just recess again for a quick minute, maybe if you can ask Mr. Fletch to come back. Convene the meeting with our full panel, and the next property on the docket is 1630 Main Street. And we are dealing with amount of assessed value. Mr. Wong, when you're ready.
The subject property is 1630 Main Street. The roll number is 110-102-05000. It's a residential apartment block that's 2 stories high. It's built in 1950, but we have an effective year built in 1960. There are 11 suites with 5 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We use average rents of $843 to get a potential income of $111,000. We use a 2% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $108,000. And we use the 45% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $59,000. Capped at 5.1%. We have an estimated market value of $1,165,000, which is about $105,000 per unit. On page 4 are some rent comparables showing that the rents we've used are in line with what's in the market. On page 5 is a summary of the income and expenses submitted by the owner. Their estimated operating income is about $58,000, which is in line with what the model has estimated at $59,000. we derived our cap rates. Page 9 is a picture of the subject property with its location. Remainder of my brief are the income statement submitted by the owner. When we look at their actual performance, it supports the model, and I ask that you maintain the assessed value of $1,165,000.
Thank you. Mr. Reimer, questions?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Again, Mr. Wong, on page 3, to the best of your knowledge, that's a model-driven valuation, correct?
Yes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Those are my questions.
Mr. Page, any questions?
Would this be the typical vacancy rate for an apartment this size? It's smaller than the ones that we've seen with the 11 suites. So we have one vacancy, and your vacancy rate is quite high. You would have one or two.
I mean, from a theoretical standpoint, it could be the case, and say if you have 1 out of 10 units vacant, it's not necessarily 10% because it might only be vacant for a month or two,
Right.
so that way.
Understood.
But to be honest, with regards to maybe the vacancy rates for, say, smaller buildings or bigger buildings, I'm actually not super attuned with that. Just that the CMHC rates are sort of in line with what we've estimated in terms of vacancy, so yeah, that's what I've observed.
So once again, these are all model-driven with no overrides.
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And you haven't inspected the property.
No, but my coworker has, my colleague has.
Any report on the property?
Oh yeah, it's been renovated.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll hear more about that and other questions.
Mr. Dunn?
I have no questions, thank you.
Yeah, my question's just the same about the cap. So we've asked it and you've answered it. So, Mr. Reimer, please proceed.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So if I could ask the board members and Mr. Wong to turn to page 8, please. So in this case, on page 8, actually, our net operating income that we are suggesting at line 33 is within $1,000 of the NOI generated by the model, so there's virtually no dispute on that point. This all comes down to cap rate, and Mr. Wong had alluded to it that the original age of this building is 1950, with a variant of 1960, and for the purposes of this hearing, I've accepted that variant age at 1960, and therefore the cap rate instead of 6 1/4, we've applied a rate of 6%, reflecting that variant age. So the suggested valuation this afternoon is $974,000 for the subject. What I've done, I do note in terms of the repair and maintenance that the NOI that I'm suggesting on line 27, I have suggested a minimum investment over the long term of $500 a suite. So that $5,500, that is based upon what I consider to be a minimum below which you start to have a wasting asset and deferred maintenance issues come up. So our NOI has that built into it. We do certainly believe that that's a very much a minimum level that you would want to assume on a go forward for maintaining the subject. So for all those reasons, asking for a value of $974,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wong?
No questions.
Mr. Donovan, any questions?
No questions.
Mr. Page?
I have no.
And I have none either. Thank you very much. Any submission? Thank you. Okay, next item on the docket is 300 Enniskillen Avenue. We're dealing with an amount of assessed value. Mr. Wong, when you are ready.
The subject property is 300 Enniskillen. The roll number is 110-103-34000. It's a residential apartment block that's 2 stories high. It's built in 1953, but we have an effective year built in 1982. There are 11 suites with 4 outdoor parking stalls. On page 2 is a sales history of the subject property. It sold for $900,000 in 2011. On page 3 3 is our income valuation summary. We used average rent of $828 to get a potential income of $109,000. We used a 3% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $106,000. We used a 46% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $56,000. Capped at 4.7%, we have an estimated market value of $1,207,000, which is $109,000 per unit. Page 4 are our rent comparables showing that rent reviews are in line with what's in the market. Page 5 and 6 is information on how we derived our cap rates and some cap rate sales. On page 8 is a picture of the subject property with its location. The remainder of the brief are the incomes and expense statements submitted by the owner. Page 9, their operating income is about $38,000. That includes some mortgage interest expense. So if you remove the expenses, it's about maybe about $55,000 of operating income. That's a little bit lower than what the model is estimated at $56,000, but it is in line. So combination of that plus their 2011 sale of $900,000. I think the $900,000 supports the value of $1,207,000, and as does their 2017 income. So I ask you maintain the assessed value at $1,207,000.
Thank you. Mr. Ryman?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Page 3, Mr. Wong. This is a model-driven evaluation top to bottom, correct?
I believe it's yes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Those are my questions.
Mr. Diamond, any questions?
Yeah, you're using a 4.7 cap rate on this.
Yes.
That's, how's that justified? It's pretty low.
Yeah, it's a, like I said, with regards to smaller buildings, that's what our information is indicating, that when the buildings are smaller, that the cap rates tend to be lower.
Yeah, they're getting lower and lower though. What about the fact that there's only 50% ratio of parking spots for number of suites? Does that affect the cap rate?
No, I don't, you know what, actually, I don't know. I don't know if that does. I don't believe it does.
Because it does make it probably less desirable for people with cars, doesn't it?
I think, yes, it definitely does. When you look at the vacancy rates of, there's a lot of apartment buildings that don't have maybe the best parking ratios. At the same time, the vacancy rates across the city are still fairly low. So I think that, the people just find their units, and regardless of the parking, not regardless, but if it doesn't have what they need, they'll just look somewhere else, but the vacancy rates seem to be pretty low.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Pike?
I have no, thank you.
Yeah, so my question was around the cap as well. So, this is a different neighborhood, obviously. Like, we're north of Inkster here now.
Yeah.
So, is that going to make a difference?
The cap rate is
It's going to drop there?
Is for,
Yeah.
yeah, it is lower. Yeah, it's in the, I would say, the West Kildonan area.
Okay. Okay, that's all I had. Please proceed, Mr. Ryder.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Page 8, please. So we are actually, again, skipping to the heart of the issue at line 33, net operating income. Our NOI that we're calculating is within $3,000 of the departments, so there, it isn't, obviously, there is some difference, but it's not materially different. That difference in turn can primarily be attributed to, if you look at our line 13, our effective gross income is actually about $5,000 less, or $4,500 less than the assessors. This is based on the 2017 potential gross income and then adding in non-ring parking and taking out the 3% vacancy. So that's where the bulk of the difference is. Our expenses are actually just a touch lower than the model-driven expenses, resulting in that slightly lower NOI of $53,761. For the purposes of this hearing, again, we've assumed that the variant age of 1982, there have been substantial renovations to the property, and we're assuming that that 1982 age is not inappropriate. And based on that 82 age and the bracketing used in our capitalization rate study, we come in at a capitalization rate of 5.75% for a value of $935,000. A couple of points, and Mr. Peitsch alluded to it, and of course I alluded to it earlier this afternoon. I do believe that there is, when you're talking about these buildings with lower number of suites, the vacancy risk by definition is somewhat higher. I also would submit that if you've got a parking spot ratio, and I had alluded to this in connection with the first appeal, if you've got a parking spot ratio that's 50% instead of sort of 1-to-1, I do believe that becomes a risk factor where the market is balanced. If you've got if you've got a landlord's market where vacancy rates, and they had been for a long time, have been extremely low, and the tenants didn't have a lot of choice, well, okay, then that's right. You can take what you can get, and if you can't get a parking spot, you figure something else out. But I'd suggest, certainly in the past few years, with all the new construction and all the rehab work and everything that's going on, the tenants' choices are getting to be a little, the market is certainly more balanced and tenants have more choice, and it could certainly be a factor. If the tenants got a choice, a couple of choices, and two of them would include a parking stall, and one wouldn't, that's going to start to have an impact on these kind of properties. Notwithstanding that, we're not suggesting bumping the cap rate at this stage, but we're using the 5.75% and suggesting a value of $935,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Moore?
No questions.
Mr. Peitsch, any questions?
Just one. How would this neighborhood, with such properties in, reflect on the cap rate, as opposed to the prior 2 to 3 that we've seen?
So, I think a fair comment is, in this case, if you go back to our page 8, and this is further to what Mr. Wong said, this property clearly hasn't been suffering from vacancy a whole lot. It had gone up, by 2017 it's up to 2.5%, but in this 3-year period the vacancy wasn't high, so at this stage, for this property, to whatever extent parking stalls might be an issue, the market is dictating that it hasn't hit yet. So I'm saying in general terms it will when there's a more balanced market, and I think it has potential here, but it certainly as of the reference date, vacancy was not an issue.
No other questions.
Hey, Mr. Dunn?
So, Mr. Reimer, I noticed that you're using your own stabilized figures and arriving at a NOI. And, one thing, you're using the actuals, in this case, wherever possible, and adjusting in other cases where you have to do those adjustments to stabilize. This building, according to the mailers, did not report any vacancies.
Well, actually in 2017 you did. You had a vacancy of 2.5%.
Okay, I saw where it said 0. I guess maybe it was like the mailer before that.
We show, so Madam Chair, on our page 8,
Yeah.
under the 2017 column, we show $2,522 vacancy loss, which is 2.5%. And so let's find that on the. Oh, okay. So if you go to our page 16, so the total income reported on our page 16 at line 105. Total income reported is $98,854. That is already net of the vacancy. If you total up the rents that are shown on the rent roll and you total that up, then that would equal on our line 3 on page 16. That would equal the 101, and this does happen not all the time, but it certainly happens routinely. That would equal the 101,376. So by definition, that net figure they're showing on line 106 of the mailer is net of vacancy, compared with the actual if you take the rent roll times 12. And now we, to your point, Mr. Diamond, we've used 3% as a stabilized allowance, which we believe, I mean, any prudent investor, when you're valuing these things, they're not gonna assume you're gonna be 100% full of the time.
And I agree with that, except that when you know, you ask us to use the actuals instead of stabilization to show evaluation, or I'm using the model to show evaluation. And you take the stabilization and then throw, here's the situation, if a building has low rents, it's not gonna have vacancies. Do you agree with that? If you have
Well,
markedly lower rents than anybody else.
if you're under the market,
Right.
then you're going to be in high demand just by.
Exactly, so you're not gonna have vacancies then, but then you're gonna use and say, well, look at the, we're only generating this kind of income out of it because we have low rents.
Mhm.
But then if you take the stabilized or the model vacancy factor and put it into it, you're skewing the numbers then.
No, I disagree, Mr. Diamond, with respect. If we take, because again, if you look at our line, our page 8 and that 2017 line,
Yep.
what we're actually doing, if you look at our line 8, okay, line 8 is 98,854. Now what was actually, if you take the 3%, it is a touch higher than 2017, but if you take that 3% off, we're within about $500, and we're then adding in, of course, the laundry and parking income underneath that. Now, the department's model, Mr. Wong can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the department's model, when it says effective gross income, that's meant to capture both the suite income, net of vacancy, but then also the laundry income and the other sources of income.
That's correct.
So our two numbers are, you know, that's how these two numbers ultimately compare. But we certainly believe, we don't believe that it's inappropriate to apply, let me take a bit of a step back. If you've got a property that is consistently at 2 or 3%, and I was suggesting a 10% vacancy, that's inappropriate. But if we're applying what amounts to, and we're agreeing in this case with a 3%, it's slightly higher than 2017, but, you know, not substantially so. But we believe that's certainly, when you step into the shoes of an investor and what they're going to be projecting, that's certainly a legitimate expectation based on the performance. So understand what you're saying, Mr. Diamond, but with respect, we'd suggest that unless we're straying far off for reasons that aren't justified, you know, if I was suggesting to you in this case the 10% vacancy or something,
Yeah.
that doesn't make any sense. We're suggesting this certainly would represent the kind of modeling an investor would use. But your point is well taken.
Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify in my mind, what, so you're saying on page 20, on page 16,
Yes.
so you're saying that 98,854, the top left there,
Yep.
that's with the vacancy already taken into account? Okay.
Exactly.
And then what you're showing is the full potential rent when the vacancy is then taken off?
Exactly.
All
So
right,
if you
yeah.
take line 105 at page 16,
Yeah.
that 98,854,
Yep,
and then you go to R on page 8, line 8,
yep,
that's where the
98,
98,854,
got it,
exactly.
got it.
Yeah.
Okay, yep, I understand, and I didn't have any other questions, so thank you.
Thank you.
Any need for summation? No, thank you. Okay.
I guess, sorry, just that, it did sell in 2011 for 900,000, that's.
Oh, yes, and you pointed that out, so good, thank you. Thank you. So now, the next property we are looking at is 309 Perth Avenue, and we are looking at amount of assessed value. Okay, Mr. Wong, you can proceed when you're ready, please.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I provided a revised value on my page 1, but I'd like to, I guess, scratch that out or remove that.
Okay, so you're not, this is not the value, you're going with the original value?
Yes,
Okay.
the original value, and I'll, it's due to the fact that it's been renovated and they put a lot of money into it, and the revised value that I was recommending was not based off of that.
So that was information you got
Yeah.
afterwards? All right, okay, so on page 5, that page should be scratched then? So it has
Well,
the-
no, just the
Just the
page-
bottom?
Yeah.
Just the
yeah.
bottom piece, yeah, okay. Okay, please proceed.
Subject property is 309 Perth Avenue. The roll number is 110-204-650-00. It's a residential apartment block that's 2 stories high. It's built in 1956 and it has 16 suites with 10 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We use average rents of $701 to get a potential income of $134,000. We get 3% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $130,000. We use a 49% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $66,000. At the 5.1%, we have an estimated market value of $1,299,000 to $81,000 per unit. On page 4 are our rent comparable, showing that the rent reviews are in line with what's in the market. On page 5 is a summary of the income and expenses submitted by the owner. Their estimated operating income is about $61,000, which is a little bit less than what the model is estimated at $66,000. On page 6 and 7 is information on how we derive our cap rates. Page 9 is a picture of the subject property with its location. And on page 10 are some interior pictures of the subject property. And on page 13 is their rent potential for 2017, which is they're estimating to be about $232,000, which is significantly higher than what the model is estimated at $134,000. And that's I guess the primary reason for removing the revised value. And on page 15, in their 2016 statement, you can see that they have a total rehabilitation expense of $674,000. So it doesn't look like we're going to, we've inspected this property to update our attributes for this property, so we'll probably do that, but in the meantime, I think their old actual performance is a little bit below the model, but all things considered, I say you maintain the assessed value for $1,299,000.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ryman?
I have no questions, thank you.
Mr. Peitsch, any questions?
I have that.
Mr. Diamond?
Okay, so you said it hasn't been inspected since the renovations have been made?
I don't believe so.
I'm looking at the photos that you have on
Yeah.
page 10, so those are pre-renovation photos?
No, those are, I believe those are post-renovation photos. They're from the property managers.
I see.
Yeah. It's not from,
Okay.
it's not from our inspection, no.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, so those are marketing photos?
Yeah, it's from Towers Realty.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, and this one is in the same neighborhood as the last one. Lower effective age, okay, and the 5.1 cap, all right. Okay, I don't have anything else, so Mr. Reimer, ready?
Madam Chair, Mr. Wong's point is well received because the assumption I made on my evaluation, there had been a significant jump in income between 15 and 17, which I had thought reflected the renovations, and to some extent I know it did. But Mr. Wong and I both in our brief have the 2017, the page that shows the 2017 potential annual income at $232,000, so I'm just asking for a 54-1 confirmation at this time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next item is, next property is 201 Belmont Avenue. And the amount of assessed value. Mr. Wong, and you are ready to go.
Excuse me, before going further, I just have to ask a question. Is the owner Phoenix Enterprises? And is that connected with cogeneration states?
I'm sorry, is
The owner of this property,
our client is Phoenix Enterprises, yes.
is that connected with cogeneration states? You know,
Sorry, both?
is that connected with cogeneration states?
Globe?
Oh, yes, yes, it is.
Yeah, and that happens to be a cousin of mine, so I think that I better. not
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
this one.
Oh, this one, okay,
Yeah.
so take a,
I'll just.
just step
I
up,
can
yep.
step up.
Yep.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Mr. Wong, when you're ready.
The subject property is 201 Belmont Avenue. The roll number is 110-206-30000. It's a residential apartment block that's 2 stories high. It's built in 1960 and it has 12 units with 9 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We used average rents of $734 to get a potential income of $105,000. We used a 3% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $102,000. And we used a 49% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $52,000. Capped at 5.1%, we have an estimated market value of $1,020,000, which is about $85,000 per unit. On page 4 are our rent comparables, showing that the rent reviews are in line with what's in the market. Page 5 is a summary of the income and expenses submitted by the owner. Their income and expenses, they're actually for 2 buildings. But estimating their operating income for the combined statements, their estimated operating income is about $213,000. 201 Belmont accounts for approximately 37.69% of that operating income, which works out to be about $80,000. And the $80,000 is significantly higher than what the model is estimated at $52,000. And also, I guess on my page 5, if you look at their expenses, their repair and maintenance expense is fairly high, and sorry, would I get to borrow that calculator, please?
R&M numbers are?
Yeah, I made a mistake with the
Okay,
repair maintenance.
okay, fair enough.
Okay, like in the summary, I made an error in the sense that, like I removed the, if you see the less R&M of 86,200, that's the R&M for both buildings. But then when I added the R&M back in, I only added it in for the 12 suites of the subject building.
Okay.
So what I did was, instead of the 11,472 that I added back in, or sorry, I added the repair maintenance back in at $956 per unit, and so that times I initially had 12 units, but this income statement is for 33 units, and so I added the repair maintenance back in at 33 units at $956 a unit, and so at the estimated NOI for the bottom, instead of 80,506 is 72,939, and that's noticeably higher than what the model is estimated at 52,000. Sorry, the bottom of page 5 are some repair and maintenance comparables for other comparable properties. The repair and maintenance for the subject property was very high, and so I used a more market repair and maintenance figure, and that's where the bottom part is.
Okay.
Okay, so, sorry about that.
No problem.
On page 9 is a picture of the subject property, and on page 10 are a few interior photos of the subject property. And the last few pages are the income statements from the owner.
Okay, this doesn't affect your actual evaluation? okay,
No,
what
no,
you're
no,
doing?
no, it doesn't,
Okay.
I just wanted to,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, anything else?
Yeah, so yeah, their repair and maintenance figures were higher than market, and so I used an adjusted repair and maintenance figure. The estimated operating income supports the model, and I asked you to maintain the assessed value at $1,020,000.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ryan?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Mr. Wong, on page 3, that's the model driven top to bottom, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Now, you've made an adjustment going to your page 5, and I appreciate you've made the adjustment. You're aware that this owner and manager is one of the top owners and managers in the city of Winnipeg, correct? As far as
I wouldn't know.
Okay, I'm going to suggest to you certainly they are. Now, you've indicated that they're higher than market, but have you have you had an opportunity to review some of the details of the repairs and maintenance that we've provided in our materials relating to capital costs and other items that might properly be excluded?
No, it wasn't provided to us.
Okay. There's not a lot that turns on it, Madam Chair, and I'll get to that in a second, so those are my questions. Thank you.
Mr. Page?
Just to confirm, your estimated NOI, new estimated
Yeah.
NOI is 72,939?
Yeah,
Okay, no other questions, thank you.
And that's, you're saying that's the appellant's NOI, your NOI is 52,034,
Yeah.
correct?
yeah.
Okay, I don't have any other questions either, Mr. Ryan?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Page 8, please. So in this case, and we've had just some discussion around the model and how it's predicting items. If you look at our line 13 in this case, we're actually significantly higher than the department. As far as an effective gross income, we're at 118,258. Pardon me, the model predicted 102,611, so we're significantly higher. We are, however, also higher on the expense side. On line 31, our total expenses are 62,371 for a net operating income of 55,887. So I had suggested, Madam Chair, that the questions, and that's why I didn't belabor the point, the questions on the repairs and maintenance and such, we're within $3,000, or I guess $3,500 of each other on the NOI, so there is not a substantial difference. We're actually higher in this case. We certainly believe, though, that we're being fair in this, in our approach, including in the stabilized repairs and maintenance. If you look at our line 27, our stabilized R&M is $23,446, which is $1,950 per door. That is certainly, admittedly, at the higher end of the range, but there is a reason for it. This, as I've suggested, is one of the top building owners and managers of residential properties in the city of Winnipeg, and they're a significant entity that's setting the market. Their business model certainly relates to achieving top quality rents, and in order to do so and be competitive, they need to keep their buildings in very, very good condition in order to generate those rents. That 118,000 that I've used in my valuation. So I asked Mr. Wong about, and in fairness, he didn't have this prior to our submission, but I asked him about the details of the R&M. At our page 31, and again, I'm not going to go through this in detail because our NOI is actually higher than the department's, but page 31 is a summary of what we had suggested would be an appropriate, or how we calculated the appropriate stabilized amount. So in the stabilized column at the very end, you'll see we've obviously taken out major repairs and capital purchases altogether, and refuse and snow removal is categorized under a separate property. And the figures in red are figures that we did not take into account as being somewhat higher than normal. But we still came in for both properties. Now recall that it's a total of 33 suites over the two properties. We came in at a value of $64,412, which is $1,952 per door. So by way of explanation, certainly if one expects to achieve top quality rents, which they are in this case, the building needs to be maintained at a high standard, and this is the level of investment that the owner has taken on in order to achieve those kind of rents for this building and the sister property. So for all those reasons, we're suggesting the NOI of $55,887 and a capitalization rate of 6%, which is falling within the 1960 to 1979 bracket. Just checking to make, the subject being constructed in 1960, sort of at the lower end of that bracket. So using the 6% cap rate, we come in at a suggested value of $931,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wong.
No questions.
Mr. Pike, any question?
I have no, thank you.
And I don't either.
Thank you.
We need to summarize on this one? No? Okay. Maybe we can call Mr. Dunn back in, please. He likes to use that.
I forgot my phone this morning, so that's what I normally rely on.
Okay, so next property on the docket is 205 Rupert's Land Avenue. We are dealing with amount of assessed value. And Mr. Wong, when you're ready, please.
Okay, the subject property is 205 Rupert's Land Avenue. The roll number is 110-102-16000. It's a residential apartment that's 2 stories high. It was built in 1950, but we have an effective year built in 1960. There are 11 suites with 5 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We use average rents of $843 to get a potential income of $111,000. We use a 3% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $108,000. And we used a 45% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $59,000. Capped at 5.1%, we have an estimated market value of $1,165,000, so about $105,000 per unit. On page 4 are our rent comparables, showing that the rents we've used are in line with what's in the market. On page 5 is a summary of the income and expenses submitted by the owner. Their estimated operating income is about $66,000, which is a little bit higher than what the model is estimated at $59,000. On page 6 and 7 is information on how we derive our cap rates, since the cap rate sales. On page 9 is a picture of the subject property with its location. And on page 10 are some interior photos of the subject property. The actual performance of the subject property, it supports the model, and I ask that you maintain the assessed value at $1,165,000.
Thank you. Mr. Werner?
Thanks, Madam Chair. This is a model-driven valuation from top to bottom, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Thanks, Madam Chair. Those are my questions.
Okay. Mr. Dunn?
So this is a sister building of the property we dealt with earlier.
Yeah, I believe it is.
1630 Main Street.
Yeah.
Which actually, the model have the exact same feature score.
Yeah.
So, unless there's a big discrepancy from what Mr. Reimer has, we probably would have to evaluate them the same amount when we come to final decision.
I would,
Because they're at the same building base, next to each other.
I'm wondering if they might even be the same owners.
That's possible, I don't notice that.
Okay. But they actually on page, on page 9, I kind of purposely, the overview shot on page 9, I purposely included all 3 of them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, in the Phoenix block, there's 3 more, probably the same series.
Yeah, there's this few clumps,
Yeah.
clusters.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Pike? And I have no questions. Mr. Reimer?
AJ, please. Mr. Diamond's exactly right. This is the sister and the same owner. So this really comes down, if you look at our line 33, the net operating income, we're a touch higher than the NOI predicted by the model. 61,572, which we believe fairly represents the performance of the subject. Obviously, if you look at the 2015 and 2016 numbers, those were pre-rentals, and the 2017 are reflective of what's, the asset we're valuing was a much, much higher income. So that is, in fact, what we've applied, and along with the cap rate of 6%. Again, we've accepted the variant age. The property is built in 1950. We've accepted the 1960 as an appropriate variant and have applied the cap rate of 6%, resulting in a suggested value this afternoon of $1,026,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wong?
No questions.
Mr. Pike, any questions?
I have no, thank you.
Mr. Dunn?
No questions.
And I do not. Thank you. final item on the docket today is 1736 Main Street. We're dealing with amount of assessed value. And Mr. Wong, you can proceed when you're ready to go.
The subject property is 1736 Main Street. The roll number is 110-204-07000. It's a residential apartment block that's 2 stories high. It was built in 1964 and has 14 suites with 19 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We use average rents of $620 to get a potential income of $104,000. The 3% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $101,000. And it's a 56% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $43,000. Kept at 5.1%, we have an estimated market value of $855,000, which is about $61,000 per unit. On page 4 are rent comparables, showing that the rents we use are in line with what's in the market, or maybe at the lower end of the range. On page 5 is a summary of the income and expenses submitted by the owner. You can see that the income for 2015 is about $15,000, and then in 2017 was about $80,000. And the same thing with their expenses, but their estimated operating income for year 15, 16, and 17 is about $6,000 or $7,000. So this property is probably not the definition of a stable property right now. On page 6 and 7, like I'm not sure what's going on with the property, but I guess just going on page 6 and 7 is this information on how we direct our cap rates and some cap rate sales. You can see on page 7 that some of the properties that we sold are about $70,000 a unit and up to about $174,000 per unit. For the subject property, we're below that range at $61,000 a unit. On page 9 is a picture of the subject property. Page 10 to 15 are the income statements provided by the owner. On page 16 are the CMHC rents. The average rent for CMHC rents for this suite mix is about $984, and the model has used something at the, I would say, at the very low end of the range at $620 per unit. So this property, it seems like it's fairly unstable. And if we use sort of unstable income expenses to try to estimate a value, it's not going to lead to an accurate estimate of value. I think we've been reasonable in using rents that are at the lower end of the range and using expenses that are at the higher end of the range. The cap rate that we used is similar to other properties. The sales range for some of our cap rate sales are about $70,000 to $174,000. We're at, I think we're reasonable at $61,000. And even the Altus cap rate sales, they're from $62,000 to $256,000. So we're at the very lower end of their range of sales. So I believe that the current assessed value is fair based off of market information, and as they maintain the assessed value at $855,000.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Martin?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Mr. Wong, and you've alluded to this, page 3, it is model-driven top to bottom, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Valuation, okay. We can agree that what investors are doing when they're purchasing and transacting these properties is they're valuing the income stream, correct?
I'm not sure. I wouldn't be able to say for sure.
Okay, I'd suggest to you that that's how these properties are valued and what they do. Madam Chair, those are my questions. Thank you.
Mr. Dunn, any questions?
Yeah, so you have a 5.1% cap rate, and you yourself admitted that this property is all over the place.
Yes.
So don't you think that would reflect more danger and maybe a higher cap rate is justified? And you have a building that is so unstable?
I think it could be. In this particular case, I think reflecting it as an apartment building in terms of the rent that it generates, like the rent that is charged. The rent that is charged is definitely at the very, very low end of the range, considering there's like 9 one-bedrooms and 3 two-bedrooms and 2 three-bedrooms. So those are big units, and for the average rent to be $620, it's definitely at the lower end of the range. I feel that we reflected the.
Okay, so you think you made up for maybe
I-
aggressive cap rate by having a low NOI based on the rents that you've attributed?
The cap rate is probably in line with other properties.
Right.
I feel that we've reflected the unstableness of the property in having in rents that are significantly below market as attested to by the CMHC rents.
Okay.
Mr. Pike?
I have no questions.
So, and did you mention, did you say that the expense ratio that you put on this is at the high end as well?
Yes.
On this property, okay.
I'm not sure if you recall from the previous property, I put in some expense ratio comparables which go from about 43 to 53%. This is the 56% and 59%. That's definitely, I guess, on the higher end of the range.
Now, was that overridden, or was this completely done by the model?
I believe this is the model.
This is the model, okay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Rimmer.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Page 8, please. I'd like to preface this by, there's a number of things Mr. Wong and I agree on. This property is, certainly the performance is indicating that the property is in some serious trouble. We can agree that the actual reported NOI is very low for all those 3 years, although I do believe 2015, I believe that's a part year statement that Mr. Wong has, and I've included some different figures from, 2016. I'm going to submit a couple of things. The departments, what I've suggested to Mr. Wong in my question was what is an investor doing when they're valuing these properties? They're valuing the income stream. That's it, pure and simple. The income stream for this property is exceptionally low, and as you'll see in my materials, I'm not suggesting you use the actuals because they are inordinately low and not sustainable. This property would have no value if you actually use the actuals in place here. What we've done on page, as you can see on page 8, so going initially to line 3, we've used the potential market gross rent of $87,648. That's the highest of the 3 years. That's back in 2015. Then we've applied a 3% vacancy allowance, notwithstanding that the vacancies in 16 and 17 were reported were quite a bit higher. And we've added in some laundry income at the highest level from 2017. So that at the end of the day, on line 13, we're coming in at an effective gross income that's still, even though it's the most optimistic of the reported numbers, that's still $15,000 less than the model suggested number. On the expenses, we've applied total expenses of $62,124. That's based upon stabilizing the repair and maintenance down to $14,000 based on a minimum of $1,000 per door. That still comes in, as you can see there, with a net operating income at line 33 of $24,862. So I struggled with this one, and I'm going to make this suggestion. Notwithstanding Mr. Wong's comments, I vehemently don't believe that the department has in any way reflected the risk associated with this property when they compare what was happening with what the model predicted. In no way does 5.1% cover it. I, however, am going to suggest this, if Madam Chair, if the board members could have their pens handy, I'm going to suggest that you take, notwithstanding the very poor performance of the property, take the NOI that the model has generated of $43,612, representing the absolute most optimistic view, and capitalizing that at 6%. That then results in a value of $727,000. At a minimum, I'd suggest that's what would need to be done. Barring that, if you're talking about going into more site-specific value, a site-specific performance evaluation, you're clearly coming in, even when you try and stabilize it, coming in with an NOI that's much lower still. So my suggested valuation of $414,000, I'll leave that with the board to consider as I have it here, but in the alternative, as I'm suggesting now, a value of $727,000 based on Much higher model-driven NOI of 43,612, and then a conservative cap rate of 6%. Thank you.
Did you say 723 or 727?
727. I apologize. Did I say 723?
You said 726.
Oh, maybe I just misread that. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Any questions?
No questions.
Mr. Pike, any questions?
You presented to us a subject stabilized NOI and indicated a particular market value, then now you've indicated in the alternative.
And the alternative at most optimistic, yes. But really optimistic.
Just wondering the thought process and
So,
that.
if you look, very good question. If you look at, this is a good example, on page 8 of line 32.
Yeah.
So the expense ratios, reported expense ratios are getting upwards of 90%. That just for any property that's being valued on income, which this is just not sustainable in any way. So I'm taking that top line, line 13, the effective gross income, and assuming hopefully some increase in that, because there's actually not a huge discrepancy there, but there is some. So some potential optimism that that's going to increase, and then getting the expenditures as quickly as possible, something closer to what would we be expected, which would probably be in the 55-58% range. And that, as I say, that's hence the request on the cap rate, because that is the most optimistic view I'd suggest of the subject.
Thank you. No other questions?
I asked you already.
But I don't have any
Yeah,
questions.
good, thank you, sorry. I lost my place there.
Yeah, there's a lot of
And just, so you have no idea what's going on here?
Other than exceptionally poor performance based on expense ratios that are not sustainable, and it's clear that's what's happening, but as far as the ability of the property to turn, that's a function of the property being where it is and the age and everything else, but as far as the ability of the property to quickly turn around, I'm trying to be optimistic.
All right, thank you. Any need for summation? Either party?